Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr.
Podcast.
Happy birthday to you.
Episode 52 of a weekly podcast can mean but one thing. This is the 1-year podversary of Rune Soup. Now, before we get on to this week's guest, may I just say from the bottom of my black heart, thank you so much everyone who's come along for this journey. Thank you for those who have listened. Thank you for those who have recommended guests. Thank you for those who have participated in the subsequent discussions. It's been a marvelous ride. Obviously, it's just getting warmed up, but it's been fantastic. In many ways, it feels a bit like a scam or a ruse because I just sort of get to, ring up people I happen to really like or respect or whose voices I think can change or improve or contribute to the discourse and basically just interrogate them about their childhoods and then ask them their opinions of things. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for people who have listened, for the guests who have come on the show. And I figured, what better way to mark the 1-year anniversary of Rune Soup, the podcast, than get guest number 1, patient 0, if you will, back on. And that is, of course, Peter and Alkistis from Scarlet Imprint. Peter and Alkistis, welcome back to, I guess, a 1-year-old's birthday party.
Thank you, Gordon.
That's great.
Congratulations. You made it.
I know. I didn't even realize it was a goal, but I have put out a podcast every week across multiple countries, a couple of months of, technically homelessness. We could say transience. And here we are. And the reason I wanted to have you guys back on is, of course, that Scarlet Imprint was the first guest on the show. So it's a year. It's the end of a year. It seemed like a good time to talk about what does 2017 look like from where you guys are, and so on. So welcome aboard.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, let's begin with some good news, some much needed good news in a fairly discombobulating year. What have been the high points of 2016 for Scarlet Imprint?
The year started on a high with the launch of Starships, actually.
I believe I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a book by this chap called Gordon White, who's a chaos magician. And it's a really interesting look at the whole prehistory of magic and the spirits. So, yeah, we started the year with that, and then it just kept rolling. And we rolled.
Yeah, I think it's important that we should make you feel slightly awkward.
It is, yeah.
At the start of the podcast. And,
I feel slightly awkward.
Yeah, because I'm trying to find a funny way of saying, "Hey, put it in your Christmas stocking." I don't know, but it's amazing to think that was this year. I mean, it's been a crazy year for the world, but I'm also sitting on the other side of the world. It's fascinating. If I think back to podcast number 1. I was sitting upstairs in the home office / second bedroom, looking out over a West London sort of Alfred Hitchcock Rear Window style streetscape. It was cold, and now I have to have the air conditioning on, and it's 7:15 in the morning. It's a fascinating. A lot can happen in a year. Put it that way.
Yeah, it has. It really has.
yeah, so London misses you.
Yeah.
We made sure that we drank in Soho last weekend to commemorate you not being there.
Did Alkistis have rum?
Did I?
Alkistis had wine.
Okay.
If you're not drinking with me, I'm too well behaved.
Oh well, that's an argument for coming out to visit.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. So no, Starships was a great start for the year, and it's been hugely successful. So we're not on the podcast to sell Starships for you because everyone's bought it.
Good.
It's been a huge success, and a well deserved success for you.
I think there's something about Starships as well, which it sort of set the theme for what I noticed at a lot of the other events in the year, which was that it brings down a lot of boundaries between different modalities and things. So we had that with all of the other events as well. And it happened with Starships that it connects things so much more. So this year's very much been a year of connecting lots of different groups together or ideas.
Well, you've had a very busy year from an events perspective, haven't you?
Yeah. This year was the year we started out trying not to do anything and to concentrate on getting books out, but there were a whole stack of events that came up that were too good to miss in terms of opportunities. So our personal year in terms of work got a little bit capsized by events, but the events themselves, I think, were really quite pivotal in changing the way that the magical community is working here. So we had 3 big events really, which was the Psych Art occult event in London, which you were at.
I was.
And then the occult conference in London, and then
Transstates
in Northampton.
Oh yes, we haven't spoken about that. That was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, Transstates was awesome. Yeah, we were delighted by it. Transstates was the first event where the academy and practitioners and artists have all turned up and very much been on an equal footing. Whereas sometimes when you're at an academic event, we kind of, the occult is somewhat removed, and they tend to be a little bit top down, where the academy talks about the occult and ignores the fact that there's a room full of occultists who've turned up to listen.
Yeah, you get to be the colour.
Yeah, we get to be the colour, which we can live without. But
Transstates felt different. It felt like everybody was on a very equal level, and everybody was sharing and listening to each other. So had a really good atmosphere and a lot more art as well present. So I got to perform there, which was my personal highlight of the year, I think. And there was art on the walls and lots of other performances, as well as talks about everything. So yeah, it was really good.
So shall we speculate? What is this? And is it? And I mean, we can't necessarily solve this if we're talking about events in general, but I have noticed over the previous, let's say, 7 years, a kind of new language of events. And it's simple things like a couple of Glastonbury occult conferences ago about learning where you put the vendors and how that part of thing is and how that flows. So events are finding a new form from a programming perspective and from an experience perspective, and that kind of was very. I mean, I saw that with the London Occult Conference and with Psych Art from a programming and just moving about the space perspective. Was that the same thing with Transstates?
Yeah, Transstates had a good space in the university, so everything mixed very well, and there were a range of things going on, but it didn't feel over programmed. Sometimes you can feel with these events that you just split the entire time and you miss everything. But Cavan did a great job in terms.
And I believe everything was recorded, so at some point it should appear online for other people to be able to catch up with what happened.
Excellent. Well, that kind of touches on something Peter hinted at a couple of minutes ago about the sort of decision to surf the 2016 sort of experience rather than go, no, I have my plans, I'm going to stick to them, and I'm going to isolate myself away. I mean, from a creative perspective, we all know that, especially if you're talking about individual writing projects, they can't be forced. However much time you allocate for them, you're just kind of wasting time if it isn't book writing time. But do you think these events are part of a perceived shift in talking about and performing magic that we might sort of use to speculate as to what might go on in 2017 and beyond?
I think the breakdown of boundaries was really exciting with all of the three events, that people weren't stuck in their silos. So with Psych Art Occult, there was the opportunity to speak with the psychoanalytic community on an equal footing. We were able to speak to the academics on an equal footing, and with the Occult Conference in London, we had a new audience of kind of first timers, people who hadn't had a lot of exposure.
There were a
to
lot more young people there, and different people I didn't recognise.
Well, talking to Jamie about it, what I perceived there was that there is the kind of, and this isn't disparaging, obviously, because we would probably consider ourselves part of this very community. There's a kind of travelling, almost sort of Radiohead groupie group of people in the UK who will go to the events when they are in non-core places like Glastonbury and so on, and you do tend to see the same faces, and there's a small amount of them. There appears to be a much larger pool of people who are slightly more interested than the average person in the occult, but not interested enough to leave London and go to Glastonbury or Northampton or wherever it happens to be. Like, that just puts it in the slightly too, I'm not that interested yet. And it seemed like there were people who were sitting right there from a affiliation perspective who managed to come to the event, which I view as good news.
Yeah, no, it was excellent news. It was really good. And it's great to see these events happening, and they're really the result of the hard work of particular individuals, and those individuals have kind of made themselves known now. So it's important to say that, Seth has done incredible work with the Occult Conference in Glastonbury in terms of being able to keep the event going.
Yeah.
And to really we did just a great job in terms of programming and getting people there. Cavan did a fantastic job with the Academy, and he's promising to do it next year. So that's a great sign that there's some continuity with it. And Vanessa and
Carl with Psych Art Cult. It was really quite a visionary thing to do, and what else?
That one particularly impressed me because obviously Carl lives in Sweden and Vanessa lives in New York, so they had an event that worked very well in London that they kind of managed to pull together from not in London.
And it was rather wonderful because we had so many people from New York that we knew just through online arriving for that, and so there was this cross-fertilization. We got to talk with these people and share ideas and things, so it was a really really valuable time.
I mean, it's one of the themes that you've been talking about a lot on RuneSoup, which is about how we move things from an online to an offline environment, because that's where the significant gains are made, and all of the events really managed to do that this year. So that was a huge step forward.
And I mean, something Alkistis just said there, where we got to meet a whole bunch of. We got to meet 60% of the population of Brooklyn at the conference in May. What are we talking about now then? So, because we've had these events and the kind of online to offline trend does appear to be happening in a way that adds communication value. So here we are at the end of 2016. What are the sort of things that we are now talking about or are able to talk about that we weren't talking about at the end of last year?
Well, that connected international community is like a really big shift. I think that's a great thing that's happened, and Starships fits into that trend as well very much, because the work that you've done has really, shown the Pacific influence, and we've got these people in New York who are also showing different influences from their traditions, and everything's starting to become less Anglo-centric. That we're getting more voices, and we're getting more voices who are being distinct rather than being kind of like a bland corporate rolling together of everything. We're getting that difference coming through, and I think that's really, really healthy.
I think that's a good way of describing it. I think there's a sort of decentralizing of Northwest European opinions on magic, or the fact that and we're all. I think Alkistis is a British citizen, but the rest of us are. That's not in a disparaging way. It's that the discourse seems to be becoming multiple voices rather than there is quote unquote magic, which appears to have a sort of broadly Golden Dawnish shape, and then there is the other stuff that other people do. And I think we're pivoting to a multi-voice way of thinking and talking about it, which is, the need for this isn't new. The need for this has been expressed for a number of decades, but it hadn't happened in observable or scalable ways, I think, up until the last 18 months. And it's the beginning of a journey, but that does appear to be what's going on. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, and I think you could look at Saint Cyprian as a very good example of how that trend's playing out, in terms of it bringing together both the Iberian and those Nordic influences, as well as the New World influences. So if we're looking for like a patron saint of this particular shift, I think Cyprian, there's a very good case for it. So we've been pleased with the work that's been coming out on the saint in the last year.
With Hadian and Rubido especially.
Yeah.
This last Cypriana Old World and Hadian's Book of Cyprian that Jose translated. This is just a lot more coming to the fore on understanding the sort of folk Catholic traditions and the role of the saints in our history. So I think that's one of the really interesting things starting to really emerge in people's practice. It is much more integrated, and there's more continuity with our lived past.
Absolutely. The kind of perceptual shift about what quote-unquote magic looks like, even 5 years ago, there was, and it's entirely invented by the Victorians, but the perceptual shift is that quote-unquote proper magic has this Freemasonic shape of aprons and levels and what have you. And yes, there are the people who maybe do other stuff out there, but when people went looking for magic, they expected it to conform to that shape. And this appears to, we've discussed it before, but another year has gone by, and that sort of repositioning or elevation of magic that matches what not only the European history, but as a result matches how magic is expressed elsewhere around the world, is kind of repositioning around this sort of Victorian wobble, which is itself legitimate. It's just that it's an expression of the other thing rather than the other way around, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Part of that's rooted in kind of a search for authenticity as a way out of the sort of postmodern morass that people find themselves in culture, and this sense of dislocation. And I can see that's driven quite a lot of the move towards tradition. But there's also,
I think what's really driving it is spirit contact. And this is what's really coming to the fore now, and what excites me. I found I don't have the same practices as many of the people I spoke to from New York. I'm not initiated into Kimbanda or these kind of traditions, but we all have a very spirit central practice. The spirit contact is the defining part of our practice, and we could talk. We were on the same page about everything, and I thought this was very interesting, that we didn't have to give up our identities or what we did, but we knew what we were talking about because our relationship to the spirit ecology is so similar, and many of our methods are the same. So it was easy to speak as oneself, to speak to people about what they do, and it's understood without it having to be, I don't know, how would you say, we don't have to be doing the same thing, but we are kind of underneath it all doing this spirit work.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to, if you remember, say, late 80s, early 90s, where you would have to religio-splain yourself to someone. I'm an eclectic Wiccan who does a bit of Norse stuff, but I also really resonate with blah, and it sounded like like a Narcotics Anonymous support group. There is a different way of talking about it now, and I just want to let's look at the risks of these new discourses, and I want to pick up something you both just said in sequence, which is the search for authenticity, and as a result, a tradition or connectivity to time and place and culture, and which is what Peter brought up and what Alkistis brought up, which is the emergence or the discovery that there are similarities in method across different authentic traditions around the world. Now, both of these come with risk. There's over the last couple of centuries, occultism and esotericism does like to take a few dives into volkishness. And then there's also the other thing it likes to do in the almost opposite direction, is universalizing to the point of basically making everything white, basically making everything imperial. So unfortunately for people who don't like complicated journeys, these are the roads we have to take, because the authentic lies down these roads. But how it's not without risk.
I agree. I think that's something that everybody has to work out for themselves. I mean, speaking for myself, it's been a process of understanding my own personal history and the history of my family to work out what it is I do and how I practice and who are my spirits. I think this is the only way. And also the recognition of where we stand, so where we actually are, the spirits of the environment that we're living in and working in. So rather than sort of comparing to other people or to some sort of idea of how something should be, but just simply recognizing where you stand and who you are, this seems to be the only way one can keep one's footing with all of this information around us. What do you think?
Yeah, but I haven't. There is certainly a risk that things will become volkish, particularly with the way in which European politics looks set to change over the next 5 to 10 years. But
I wonder if that isn't an argument for doing it anyway. I mean, I sort of mentioned in Pieces of Eight, one of the things I resonated with St. George, and I have for years. And as we know, in a kind of Blair New Labour world, Englishness and St. George were relegated to racist football hooligans. And funnily enough, that's part of the sort of neoliberal empire worldview that is in fact dying, that anyone who isn't, New Labour is a racist football hooligan. Nevertheless, these people exist. And so I wonder if, and this is at least my idea behind it, does there need to be people, certainly not engaging with those communities, they're awful, but is there a way that is sort of like a show by doing of how you explore culture and connectivity in a way that isn't appalling and anti-migration and so on? And is that part of the quest? Is that something that needs to be done if people resonate with, so that you don't automatically assume if someone's talking about St. George, they're about to make some disparaging comments about Polish people?
Yeah. I mean, if we don't take that space, then that space will be filled by the Volkish right. So there's an argument that we should do that. And there's also a need for that awareness when we engage with ideas to do with, place and local spirit and landscape and traditions, that there is the danger of this discourse within it. And I don't think a way has been found through that yet. No. We see that with, I see that a lot looking at the attempts for people to find a new nature writing, with kind of little success, but trying to understand how you can, certainly in an English tradition, understand yourselves as inheriting, Wordsworth and the Romantic poets and the ideas of, the ideas of this enchanted landscape without ending up being Rudyard Kipling or any of the other kind of imperial fascists who also walk these kind of paths. So I mean, as always, it's a balancing act, and it's a danger, but that's what magic's about. Magic always has this ambiguity. It has this difficulty.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the great things about what we do is that it is a mixed tradition. And it's a European tradition, and magic's always been whoring after strange gods, and by demonstrating that from the Greco-magical papyri right the way through to what modern practitioners are doing, I think is a very strong way to defend magic from it being narrowed down into kind of these racist tropes.
But I think magic has always happened at these intersections and trade routes, so it's always been magic's always been something that's moved through mixing.
It is the opposite of nationalism, because it's almost a feverish nightmare of anti-immigrant parties. Like there's no parts of it that didn't come from elsewhere, even though even though they very quickly plug into local space. So that's it couldn't be. I mean, the word internationalist is rightly a very dirty word because it comes with hydrocarbon wars and all the rest of it. But before there were hydrocarbon wars, there is this way of this almost opportunistic, very opportunistic way of seeing the world that did travel culture to culture through trade routes and crossroad cities and so on. And there's something very delightful, and it's kind of one of the prizes of healthy identity formation that come along with doing this journey in a coherent way.
Yes.
You bring up an interesting point about the nature writing, because a number of people don't know that quite a few people don't know that the 20th century sort of naturalism, nature writing that birthed things like Wicca owes a lot to early Nazi programs, as well as the sort of Rudyard Kipling type writing about sceptred isles in the 19th century. There is it's really dangerous roads to talk about your land, which obviously has to be done, but it needs to be done in a way of not kind of stacking them by order of which ones are good and which ones are bad. And I think we're getting there, but I think in the nature writing language, as ever, my recommendation would be people need to do a bit of history, so that they know where things fall and where things don't. And from that kind of shared sense of where the journey's already been, there's an opportunity to have those discussions. Because one of the pieces that kind of emerged from an episode with Dr. John Reed when we were talking about animism is that if you look back through history, there aren't too many / not quite true. There aren't too many totalitarian animist empires, and the reason being is that it's not really a worldview. It's a racist imperial word to bucket together how the majority of the Earth experience place in the spirit world, but the internal inconsistencies or the external inconsistencies between different cultural groups were much smaller than the internal consistencies, so that you have a worldview that allows people to this is how spirit and land is expressed for these people or this tribe, and it is not necessarily in conflict, because it restores the primacy of both place and spirits, which is what Alkistis was saying. So I think there is a kind of intercommunicative need to have that animist worldview as a critical object in magic now, because the one that it is replacing, like it or not, is a monist Platonist holdover from the 19th century, and that one struggles because you do then start and you 777 the gods and spirits of the earth into your preferred structure, and that automatically impairs communication and examination.
Yeah.
I think we have to move away from the Platonic emanationism and towards a more, I guess, localized, how would you say, holographic. There are everywhere is points of consciousness, not there is one source of power and it is pouring down. I think there's a political implication to that as well, as you were saying, and I think we're getting more localized in this sense, and not in the way that it doesn't have to be Volkish, like this is my land, but it's simply about where you find yourself standing. This is where you have relationship. This is the world you're knitted into.
I think when you understand the way that spirits work is as an ecology, and that we're very much within a web of spirits and in a web of spirit relationships, and that comes out of a relationship with the land and a relationship with spirit, and that's something that doesn't come out of the books, and it certainly doesn't come, as you say, out of the 777 approach to magic. You need to be able to understand
it's not even overt in the grimoires. I mean, the grimoires replicate quite old hierarchies and things, but the way the spirits actually operate within them is quite different in many ways.
Yeah,
it's much more this one spirit will lead you to another, and they have relationships that aren't explicit in the way it's written. So, yeah.
So if you look at hierarchies, I think there's an element of sort of Central European writers trying to give some sort of scientific respectability, words that weren't really real back then, but you know what I mean. If I look for a natural, which I tend to, corollary, it would be that, again, going back to the kind of imperial cataloguing of the entire world, just because you can write a book that has the different phyla and subphyla of the ferns of South America into a book doesn't mean they behave that way or their distribution matches the book in any way, shape or form. And there's a...
It's not to say that there are no hierarchies. I'm not saying there are no hierarchies, because if you look at nature, there are clearly hierarchies. You have, the bird of prey at the top is the king, and other creatures below this, for instance. It's just that there's much more complexity in the way these function, which is closer to the natural world. And so I find so much parity between the spirit world and the natural world that spending a lot of time in nature and just observing how things relate and how the different times come and pass. It's quite different to the linear time that we have become used to as humans, and quite different to the sort of fixed, rigid hierarchies we have.
And these rigid hierarchies, as you say, it's a Victorian and it's an imperial and it's a particularly masculine view of working with spirit, which is problematic. That doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that you then enter into a spirit-friendly approach and you just see everything as misunderstood. Spirits are dangerous if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Which is another natural world corollary.
Yeah,
entirely. You have to know how to move in this space, and these worlds overlap. People very often miss the fact that the spirit world is present and around us. They expect it to be somewhere other, rather than somewhere which is continuous with the experience in the world that we're in. So they don't understand that the theophanies that are going on are in terms of the weather, in terms of animal appearance, in terms of random encounters with strangers, in terms of plants. So there's an importance to be really kind of embedded in one's local ecology. That changes in a city slightly, but you're still
the same.
You're still dealing with these same kind of understanding of patterns and nodes and places where you are likely to find and encounter spirits, and magic's about doing that rather than retreating into an intellectual position where you try and line everything up on your chessboard and expect everything to be like that in the world. It isn't. It's much
Much more fluid.
much more fluid, much more dynamic, and it's that dynamic understanding which is so important to magic, and is something that can only be experienced.
I'm hoping this is what's really going to be coming forward much more as we go into 2017. These understandings of spirit and magic and how it works and how fluid it is. It's,
So let's put some flesh around that. Let's have some examples about what that looks like. What a local practice that is, informed by the magic contained within grimoires, and space kind of operates somewhere. I mean, you guys are very difficult to get a hold of because you're usually up a hill in the sleet.
Yeah.
But I mean, talk through that. How does that work in a local space without devolving into, because the piece that I don't want to see coming back, because I do kind of see this pivot, but the thing I don't want to see coming back is a Disneyfied fantasy of like basically turning everything around you into humans that are well disposed to you, which we've sort of sloughed off a few decades ago, coming out of the 70s. I think there needs to be a new way of talking about it. I think we went too far. I think it sort of ended up being not as present as it needs to be. But let's talk about what that looks like.
Well, I can give you an anti-Disneyfied version of that from last summer when I was doing some work with one of these one of the spirits in the Grisha of Solomon, Corvid spirit, and I was out in the woods, and I managed to crash my bike at high speed and smash my helmet to bits, and I was lying on the floor, bleeding quite heavily, and the happy Raven King of the Wood started calling for his friends because there was an exciting piece of fresh meat bleeding there. So I got my spirit encounter with the Raven that I was looking for, but the relationship certainly wasn't particularly Disneyfied because I was simply meat in place, and that's the way these spirits look at you. These where we are at the moment as well. The valley that we're in is the scene of
a lot of bloodshed.
A lot of bloodshed, and one major massacre in particular when the Welsh made their kind of final uprising to try and kick the Romans out, and it all ended disastrously, and the river here ran red with blood. But that means that the spirits who are here, the ravens and the crows that live here, are the descendants of the ravens and crows that ate the dead of the last Celtic army that was here. So there's a lot of continuity. There's
continuity of people. So you see the same names in the graveyard, and there are people that have had their families here for 500 years, and they're still, like, the family is still here. But this continuity is not just of people, but of trees, of birds. They're the same families. There's a kind of sense of it is ever present, and you really feel that. I mean, it's kind of a bit timeless. It's a strange atmosphere, but this sense of the continual immanence of these spiritual manifestations. I think theophanies even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're in a kind of very peculiar place because when you look at the grimoire instructions or the instructions across cultures, they say if you wish to call spirits, go somewhere desolate, go somewhere where there aren't people, go somewhere to an abandoned castle, go somewhere, and funnily enough, we have quite a few of those ritual sites here. And not a lot of ritualists and not a lot of people. So we're able to spend a lot of time in the landscape, both in location, working point, and also in terms of like moving through landscape, because we have a lot of ancient ways as well. So
a lot of these sort of pilgrimages, a lot of moving through is quite an important part of our practice.
And the implications of why across different spirit traditions, you have that insistence that if you want to talk to these spirits, go somewhere desolate, is because, and this is crucial, that's where they live. So there's an attitude. It comes back to what Peter was saying about the spirit world. There is an attitude that it is something you can switch on and off like a television, like, I'm going to talk to the spirits now, remote control, and then when you're done, switch it off. But if read correctly, you find that isn't how practitioners either around the world or back through time in a northwestern European experience conceptualize spirits. They knew they actually had homes, and it's again, it's another natural world corollary. It's like, well, this is where it lives. And also, crucially, I was thinking about this with what Alkistis was saying about you get a sense of time and timings with nature. Inevitably, in permaculture, a cycle is described as a niche in time. So if you look at some of the research that is being done in South Africa to do with great white shark attacks, great white shark attacks, 80% of them cluster around a certain corner of the bay at a certain time. Like, everyone knows, like, don't go swimming or surfing at dawn or dusk. But beyond that, there are actually times where this particular group of great white sharks eats, and other times it doesn't. And if you know those times, you don't go in the water then. And if you do, you go in the water at other times, and they're not eating. They'll swim right by you. And there is an understanding of time and place that I think can become more nuanced when you do the natural world corollary, which potentially has very important implications for how we conceptualize magic in the universe.
And that requires time spent.
Yeah,
and that
you just build it with experience.
You have to keep walking the landscape. You have to keep spending time in place in order to get through and see things. And one of the problems,
different things appear at different times.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I think. I mean, obviously it's astrological, but that's what I think is the understanding behind, because you won't find timing tables that match anywhere for a variety of reasons. But I think underneath that is the awareness that the spirit world behaves in that niche in time sense. Where I live, I was explaining this the other night to you guys, but in the winter, because there wasn't that much to eat, which is when I showed up, we would have loads of possums in the backyard. We still see a couple a night, but now that it's gone to mid-spring, in the daytime we have a couple of hundred rosellas, which people can hear usually on the podcast or the video, in this giant tree in my front yard. At sunset, they leave, and a couple of hundred bats, well, maybe about 20 to 80 bats show up, and they're the ones that get the tree and the nectar during the evening. And you start to see these cyclings. They leave as the sun comes up. You get the cockatoos through, and then the rosellas again, and you're starting to see that each of these spirits, frankly, has a time. There is a time for it. If you try to summon Rosella in the middle of the night, you're not going to get anything.
Yeah, and I think there's also been a problem with people overwriting spaces, by which I mean that when people think, I should be working outdoors, for example, they turn up and they immediately unpack all their psychic nonsense and all the ideas of the experiences that they should be having on top of the place. So they're unable to actually have a spirit experience because they've turned up with an idea of what should happen. And they've turned up with a whole superstructure of ideas and beliefs, which might well be which are very likely to be contrary to the space they're working in.
That's absolutely. It's one of the best things that kind of happened to me from an experience of place perspective about maybe 5 years ago was finding, and it's in either Chaos Protocols or Pieces of 8, but an invocation that can be adapted that lets place speak. So calling spirits of place from the pieces of landscape rather than calling it because you think, I don't know, you think this particular spirit lives there already, and it was just like, switching on the power, switching on a light. It just kind of hums to life when you find a way of talking to what's actually there, rather than calling it something that probably isn't there.
Yeah, it's diplomacy. It's establishing a dialogue, and it's also knowing when to get the fuck out as well. I mean, there are times when the woods don't want you there. You know, there is other business happening, and it's not a good place to be.
Well, that's definitely the shark example again, isn't it? It's like, no, sunsets. I'm going to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely had those experiences.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, that's good. I mean, so there are a number of things we kind of want to see die, if for this kind of emergent practice to set its roots, and I think that's one of them. I think there are those expectations, but what are some of the sort of out of place persistences that need to go away? It's a tough one, but you know, I want to see what we can do in terms of weeding.
Yeah, I think we've done well to cover the sort of 777 approaches and that imperial emanationist mindset. But there's another thing that I think that we need to step away from, which is this kind of tendency to go towards a pseudo-academic method of expressing oneself in the magical writing.
I think we have to find new ways to language our experiences, to tell our stories and histories with. And I think that the influence of the academy has been really good, actually. It's put a lot more material on the table. But I think I've noticed a tendency to kind of ape in a pseudo-academic style for occultists to write, I guess a search for credibility or something. It's
an appeal to authority.
An appeal to authority, yeah. And I think this is something that we need to get beyond. It's a phase of sort of being able to express oneself well, but then we need to find new ways of languaging what we're doing that are closer, that are more artistic in that sense. More poetic, more free.
Yeah. And probably more authentic. I know what you mean. I think
the spirits that we're talking to, so that what emerges isn't something. So we're not taking this sort of third position, like an academic position, but actually we're fully engaged in what's happening.
That is exactly it. The third position was what I was looking for. There's a very good case to be made that it is aping, and I think what needs to emerge, and it's scary having done this, it's scary actually putting your practice, like things you do, these are things I do, out there, and I see not only the sort of appeal to authority, but I also see people hiding behind pretendy academic ways of talking about things, so that it's difficult. Like, particularly with Pieces of 8, it was very difficult to say these are things I do, and I was not expecting that. I was not expecting it to be scary to say this is stuff, this is live, these are things I do now, and the temptation not just to make yourself appear credible, but to sort of fall back into academic talk, I think needs to shift. I think there needs to be a kind of movement in trend towards practitioners talking about practice. I mean, the question is, and this is my question, is there, how to describe this? Is there a sufficient volume of people with a more coherent view of the history and discourse, particularly of Northwest European magic, out there, so that to some extent the battle has been won? So we're in a post Burning Times fantasy world, but also probably a post Triumph of the Moon world, so that if you want to know the history of magic as in an accurate sense, there is sufficient stuff readily available out there, and do we need to start talking about something else?
Yeah, I think we're in a position now where we can point people to these core texts and say, look, do your history here, but it then becomes the job of magicians to do something else.
To take the work forwards.
Yeah, to take the work forwards.
I think this becoming conscious that we are a living tradition and not simply trying to resuscitate what's been done in the past. I mean, to take inspiration from the past and to learn from the material that's becoming available,
and then to have the courage to take it forward.
Yeah.
Rather than relying on our illustrious history.
It's what I find fascinating about the work of Peter Redgrave and Penelope Shuttle. You know, there were a few texts available when they were working, and there was no such thing as Cornish witchcraft. They were in Cornwall, and there's some folk practices, and they had Kenneth Grant, a few books like this, and they imagined it, and they worked at it, and they worked in the landscape, and discovered their own craft through doing this, which is documented in a number of books, would you say? It's actually in the novels. A lot of strange stuff is in Peter's novels, but in especially The Black Goddess and The Sixth Sense. So I think that's kind of interesting, and we need to take more this approach to magic now, and to take risks. We need to take those risks in order to bring things forward. We need to be more experimental. I'm very keen on having more of an avant-garde approach to things. This is my as it is with my dance. I want to use that to drive something about my history forwards, and I think the same with witchcraft and with magic. We have to.
So again, we're at that Taleb point of skin in the game, where it's important for magicians to do what you did with Pieces of Eight, and to take the risk.
Well, does that mean we can? Will we be expecting Lucifer Praxis soon?
Yeah. Praxis will happen.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it'll be scary. It'll be scarier than any of your other books, because you'll be, and you won't expect it. Maybe you will now that I've mentioned it. But it's creepy when you actually put. I have a volume of practical enchantments and things on Rune Soup, and there was clearly magic in Chaos Protocols, but Pieces of Eight was live. It was a snapshot of what I was doing in London just as I left, and that was real skin in the game. I didn't expect it to be that scary, and I think more people. For me, this is a personal thing. I don't know if it's as universalizable, because there are people who listen to the show come from a variety of different backgrounds, but it's something I spoke to Giulio about when we were off getting massively drunk the other week. There seem to be a lot of people talking about grimoires and arguing as if they are trading cards about which ones are better, and but no one, and a lot of people saying you should, work with the grimoires, but I don't see too many examples of what that looks like live. So the kind of grimoire stuff that is in the back of Pieces of Eight is my adaptations of it. It's new, and I mean I mentioned that I'm like, this isn't you won't go to Honorius and get this exact invocation, but it's also a kind of piecemeal picking from Cambridge Book of Magic and all the other stuff that I was reading at the time, and I don't think there are enough. And this is what I want to see for 2017. I want to see people stop treating grimoires as like some kind of trading card game where you're arguing about which player is better than another, and I want to see all these people who apparently use grimoires. I want to see what that looks like live. I want to see what that looks like with a current running through it. And that's my hope for 2017, that as we move from academia into practitioners talking, we get more of that.
Yeah. And we need the voices of the spirits to be coming through in the work. We need a sense. I want to be reading stuff where there's a sense of spirit contact. I want to have a sense of the spirit rather than not arguing about which manuscript's which. I want the proof of the magic to be out there, because that's also what inspires people to do this work.
Well, it was the spirits that inspired us to start working with them.
Yeah,
absolutely. You can smell it too. You can smell the difference. You can read a book by supposedly and funny enough, this works both ways. So you can read a book supposedly by a practitioner that doesn't smell like it has much practice in it. And on the other side, going back to academia, you can read some books by academics that go, my goodness, this you guys are not telling the full truth about just quite how far you went with your quote-unquote academic research. And I think particularly when it comes to spirits, there needs to be a sniff test that each reader and practitioner can develop for themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's enchant that for 2017 then, because there are more practitioners now than network than perhaps ever in history, and we've got an opportunity for this to occur.
We're talking.
No, exactly. Well, what else? Okay, we're coming towards the end, so let's talk about 2017. What else do we want to see? I mean, presumably more events. More analog, if not necessarily events. I would be more than. I don't think we need. A conference is great, but so is also driving 2 hours to the next town or city over, particularly if you're in the US, because there's someone who you resonate with online and have humans meet is something I want to see and I hope is happening in 2017.
I absolutely agree. More real world connections.
Yeah. I think the internet's become so toxic to people.
I think that reached its height this year.
That people are beginning to see that it's just a simulacra, and they're beginning to feel cheated by it.
It's not life. It's a useful tool in order to make those connections, but they have to be consummated in real life. You have to be around a table together with a bottle of wine open and rum and be talking about stuff and then get out and do stuff. So I think 2017 should be the year of analog magic.
Analog magic, yeah. Breaking bread
And getting drunk a bit.
Yeah.
Getting drunk a bit, getting drunk a lot, see what happens. All right, so let's do another version of that then. So I was thinking about this kind of last night. But the podcast, and I'm very grateful for this, but the podcast has grown more than I expected. And I get people who email who say either I've just found the podcast or I've really only just discovered/rediscovered my interest in magic. What if 2016 is the first year someone discovers magic? And I keep saying Northwest European magic for reasons that you understand as well, because I want to decolonialize the discussions as much as possible and say when I say it, this is what I mean, because that is my tradition, but it is a tiny sliver of the expression of magic around the world. But if this is the first year someone has found Northwest European magic, what's some free advice? Here you have a blank slate. They don't have to go reading through Scott Cunningham and spend 15 years in the wilderness and what have you. If there was here's what you should do. Come back and see me in 5 years. What's the free advice for someone who's new?
Well, we can give contradictory advice. There's the advice that Banksy gave in Exit Through the Gift Shop, where he says I used to tell people that they should be artists and encourage them to do so, and now I don't. So one part of magical advice is don't do it. Don't do it. But
it's
magic is there. Magic is there for the few people who have to do it. There will always be a lot of curious people, but there will only be a statistically small number of people who have to do it. And it's the people who are driven to magic who might make their way through it because they don't have any fucking choice. So the first thing I'd say if I was addressing those people is there's too much information out there now. The history has been done, the work's been done. There's an impossible amount of material flooding out. So stick to one text, or stick to a small family of texts and work through them. Don't
be faithful to them.
Be faithful to those rather than being drawn into an endless upgrade spiral of trying to buy the next latest and greatest. The people who make progress are the people who
get their hands dirty and stay focused on what they're doing. I think.
Yeah.
Just continual practice.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, people should also be reading very widely. They should be reading outside of magic rather than finding themselves trapped in a very narrow silo. They need to understand that magic has always been part of a wider cultural project. So it's important to also have a historical and a cultural and an anthropological perspective of things. So it's important that people don't end up trapped in some, tiny goldfish bowl subculture. And then it's...
Allow space in your life for random things to happen.
Yeah. And then it's a question of opening up channels of communication. So that means a divination system or a pendulum, but finding something that you can use in order to engage in conversation with spirit.
Well, that's all good.
Yeah, and shut the fuck up. Don't plaster it all over the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, the opinions of someone who's got 10 months experience.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So speaking of 2017, and I know we chat about this on Twitter quite a bit, but what have you guys got coming up from a Scarlet Imprint release perspective? Particularly, the one I mean, something Saturn.
The Game of Saturn by Peter Mark Adams is the next title, which we are aiming to open the pre-order on the 14th of December for release early 2017. And that's about the Solarbuska Tarocchi. It's an absolutely fascinating book. Peter's done an amazing job bringing this research together. So I'm very excited for that to find its way into the world next year too. And I think it will contribute something very interesting to this understanding of the Western esoteric tradition. It's a side of it that's not often emphasized when we think of the Renaissance. It's much darker and it's very intriguing. So I'm very excited for that to come out. We got some other interesting things planned, but maybe we should be quiet about that.
Well, but we got two. We know two are coming. So we have that one, and we know Lucifer Praxis is going to happen at some stage, isn't it, Peter? We're all waiting.
Yeah, of course it is. I'm just gonna delay it until Julio completely freaks out.
He's going to lose his fucking mind at this point.
Yeah.
Well, we've got Brazen Vessel as well, where we're putting our essays together that we've worked on the last 9 years. 2017 is our 10th birthday, so
yeah,
we'll use that to put out this work, which kind of marks a turning point for us. So
to give you an idea, before Praxis comes out, I'll be dropping
Brazen,
which has got
it's about 30 essays.
It's about 30 essays, and about 20 of them are mine. So there's a lot of material going out.
Yeah,
oh, splendid.
A lot of material.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to that.
Right. So don't buy books.
All right. Well, guys, thank you very much for participating in this 1-year-old's birthday party. I will obviously link up all of these things. It's not that, neither of you need any introduction. But this has been really, really pleasant, and I imagine I'll speak to you beforehand, but if not, see you at the second birthday party.
Yeah.
Yes.
Congratulations, Gordon.
Yeah, well done.
Good to speak.
Year 1 complete. Oh, if you noticed some audio gremlins in this episode, apologies for that. I suppose I really shouldn't be surprised, seeing as it was Peter and my discussion about Lucifer a year ago that broke my otherwise entirely reliable Skype setup, and it's never quite been the same since. This was actually, bless them, I think the second or third attempt at getting a recording out the door. I hope you enjoyed it regardless, I certainly did. It's quite challenging to talk about what's coming up. Because I guess almost by definition, we don't have the words for it yet. But thinking about it whilst obviously going back through the episode and editing and so on a macro level, what we're talking about, I suspect, in this episode, is sort of the second phase of this double phase magical revival. So if you think about the first phase was the restoration of context, which we've spoken about quite a bit, and you'll find on the blog and in 2/3 of my books. The next phase is, we might call it the activation of context. And I think that about describes sort of what we were attempting to discuss or talk around. I'll obviously be leaning a lot more into that in the coming year. And I know I mentioned this at the top of the show, but thank you all again, sincerely, so much for listening and subscribing and participating and so on. For me, this has been, well, it's been a lot of fucking work, frankly. But it's also been, and I guess will presumably continue to be, an amazing experience. So, thanks once again. Until next time.